Howdy, everybody. This is Take.
Hi, I'm Richard,
We are broadcasting from Okayama, Japan to the world.
and you're watching Take's Bluegrass Hero interviews.
In this series, we explore the lives and contributions of the remarkable individuals who have shaped bluegrass music and who I consider my heroes.
Our guest today has the distinction of being the only bluegrass and newgrass boy, the very talented banjo picker, Mr. Butch Robbins.
Butch was doing something unusual, something truly creative when he became my hero. Butch, we are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Great. I said you were doing something creative. I was referring to your 1977 album, 40 Years Late. We'd like to touch upon the album a little later. But first,
Okay.
since Richard is leading the interview today, he has the first question to get us started. Richard?
Okay, Butch, many bluegrass musicians have come from musical families. Before TV became the centerpiece of home entertainment in the 50s and 60s, many families often played and sang together. Did your family play instruments and encourage you at a young age?
My father and his two brothers, Claude and Dick Robbins, had a little three-piece band. Well, actually, they played four pieces. They played with a guy named James Davis over around Welch, West Virginia, and some of the places over here. But it's my understanding that my dad had a mandolin, and somewhere about the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I took a hammer to it and broke it all to pieces. So there wasn't much music in my house after that, except we listened, especially a lot when we went to my grandfather's house. They had a lot of the Charlie and Bill Monroe records. They had I think they had close to 60 of those things that they had. And I heard a lot of that music while I was young. But basically, I started the fella James Davis I was telling you about, who had played with my father and two uncles, had two sons. And I was up about 12 years old, I guess. This would have been somewhere around 1961, 62. James called my father up and had him look for a banjo and a dobro for his two sons, for James's two sons. And my dad found a dobro in a pawn shop in South Carolina, bought it for $5, had the neck broke out of it. He took it home and repaired it and called up James, and they came down and got that. But they hadn't found a banjo yet. So we started looking for banjos, and that's where I got introduced to it. I think I may have been started playing because of all the attention my dad was giving to these other boys, and I was trying to do something to get his attention too, maybe. But anyhow, when a banjo came along and everything, I started thumping around on it a little bit. And next thing you know, I found a fella named Homer Israel and started to thumb, index, middle picking rolls. And James loaned my dad a guitar, so my dad started accompanying me on guitar, and that's basically what got me started right there. Was playing for that, and we started going to contests and fiddlers conventions and such as that at that point, and I just started picking up from people.
So you started up when you were about 12 years old then?
Yeah, somewhere in the 12, 13-year-old range, 61 to 62. We were living in North Carolina at that point. We came to Virginia here in 1963 when my dad became a school teacher at a local technical school, vocational technical school. And we moved up to Virginia, which was great for me. I mean, I had Homer Israel took me to a show in Spartanburg, South Carolina one time. And it was a country music show, and it was featuring Bill Anderson. He had a hit record out called Still at that point. But also on the show were Flatt and Scruggs, Mother Maybelle Carter, and Reno and Smiley. Mm-hmm. And the show starts off with Flatt and Scruggs. I walked into that auditorium, and Earl was playing Flint Hill Special, and I was walking about 3 feet off the floor after that. Got down and sat in my seat. Flatt and Scruggs did their show. They brought out Mother Maybelle, and Earl and her played a little bit together. And then they had an intermission. Well, after the intermission, Bill Anderson came out. And I couldn't figure out this. I thought he was the star of the show, and I thought they always finished. When he got finished, Don Reno and Red Smiley come out, and I was absolutely starstruck. Don Reno was the most entertaining thing that I had ever seen in my life. When they went into the chicken hot rod routines and everything, I could see why, most of the country music guys who worked, Carlton Haney had put on that show down there. It was before he started doing bluegrass festivals. But all these country music people that would work for Carlton, they said they would never follow Reno and Smiley. And it was because I was completely starstruck. And then when we moved up here to Virginia, Top of the Morning was on about 50 miles up the road from me in Roanoke, Virginia. And if I wanted to learn anything from Don and everything, we'd just get up and go to the TV show in the mornings, and Don would show me stuff. And he was just a wonderful mentor for me at that stage of my development and everything. And anyhow, that's sort of how I just got mixed up in it and started in all the stuff. I had become starstruck by Don Reno and everything else. It was later after that my banjo style deviated a long way from what I'd learned from him. But anyhow, that's sort of how my start came about and my father's influence in it.
So about that time, excuse me, is when you decided to pursue a career in music?
Not necessarily a career. I just decided, I was fascinated by the sound of the banjo. And like I said, we started going, I'll be playing a tune here for you after a while called 40 Years Late and everything. It was going around fiddlers conventions that I learned that C minor tuning from Tommy Jarrell, these old fiddle players. And I found out later on that when you got in these old jam sessions or got around places like that, the folks that got the most attention were the fiddle players. So that's why I developed a style of playing where I could, play the melody of the fiddle tunes.
Oh, that's really interesting. So when you were fresh out of high school, about 1967, you played the Bean Blossom Festival with Bill Monroe as one of the Bluegrass boys. So,
yes, he hired me. Lamar Greer was trying out at the first Fincastle Festival, and Bill had already. I'd already met him at the opening of the Melrose Shopping Center. Carlton had introduced me to Bill Monroe at that point. And my dad and Bill got to talking, and they determined that I was going to have to finish. I wanted to go to work for Bill then. And my dad and Bill got to talking, and they determined that I needed to finish high school before I tried to go out here and become a professional musician. So that's what I went back. I went back and spent the next couple of years. And then my dad sent Bill a graduation announcement. And I got a call one Saturday morning. I was working a little part-time job. And he called this place where I was working. And I answered the phone. And he said, this is Bill Monroe. Would you like to come to work for me on the Grand Ole Opry? And I was flabbergasted. So that was my first introduction to professional music. There really was being hired by Bill Monroe, and my dad drove me down to Nashville, and I made it through the first week. There, I had to go. Lamar had to go on the first trip that I went out on with Bill because they were playing a Canadian broadcasting show, and I wasn't in the union. But after that, when we got back to Nashville that next week, Bill took us up to Bean Blossom and worked us like a dogs for a week up there. And then when it was all over, the payment for it was certainly not what I was expecting. I put that in my book, the W-2 form that came from it. I think I was paid $53 for a week's work. So when we got back to Nashville, I started thinking about what I was going to do. And it was during the Vietnam era conflict during then. And I was standing real close in line to get drafted. So I came back up here and went to school to try to avoid the draft, really. didn't do me any good. They got me anyhow 2 years later, and that's when I wound up going in the Army and spending 2 years of my life down there, 69 through 71, in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And that's where I met up with Snuffy Jenkins and all those guys, and got a real taste of the history of where banjo playing came from.
I understand from reading and listening to some sources that there are some unwanted conflicts between you and Monroe, and I don't want to dwell on that. But just to clarify one thing, would it be fair to say that your differences were more about personality than the musical disagreements?
There were all that many musical disagreements between us. I think the way that I lived my life back in those years, especially after I went back to work in 50 and 77, I think, Bill, I was sort of a wild child back in those days. And as far as musically, as long as I tried to play melodies, and I'll be talking to you about the melodic banjo playing here in a little while, as long as I played his melodies as true as I could play them and everything, I don't think he ever issued a whole lot of complaints about my banjo playing out there. It was more the other way that I conducted. The main thing that you had to do as a bluegrass boy is every time you came off that bus, you had to be dressed well, and you had to meet the public in a kind and friendly manner.
Mm.
And that was the thing that we always did, in that band. But some of the other stuff, like staying up all night at campgrounds and playing, going in at 7 o'clock in the morning, him coming in at 8 o'clock and that next morning, getting you up after an hour's sleep and going, I was possibly a whole lot more grouchy than he had anybody else working with him during that period.
Butch, if I can go back in time a bit, your early career, after you left Bill Monroe the first time there, you have quite a diverse performance history for a bluegrass musician. I read that you played with Harry James in Las Vegas. I know you also appeared on Leon Russell's album and toured with him as well before returning to the Bluegrass Boys. How did those experiences affect your playing style, if at all?
Well, my playing style was just developing itself at that point. And anytime I heard about a job anywhere, I would go try to get that job, whether it was that Harry James Phil Harris show in Las Vegas or the Leon Russell stuff that I was fortunate enough to be involved in. And that guy, I mean, the two of the biggest friends I ever had, or closest musical acquaintances I had out there, actually were Bill Monroe and Leon Russell. That was just a curiosity for me. But basically what I was doing then was just trying to take the banjo anywhere that I could and see how I could develop a style that would enable me to play in that situation.
Well, that's very interesting, though. It's a very different kind of situation. Big band music. Leon Russell's full out country at that point, and pedal steel. Did you play pedal steel then?
No, I never played pedal steel.
Oh,
That
okay.
was some of those talented guys like Jack Hicks and some other people. Winnie Winston was another one that turned out being a great steel player as well as a wonderful banjo player. Bill Keith, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I just never had any desire to do that, that whole thing with the tuning doing. It's just like with tuning pegs, tuners. I use my tuning pegs to stay in tune. I don't use them to play tunes with.
Okay, I've got another one for you then. You've had many memorable experiences in your long career, and you're explaining some of them to us today. How does playing for President Carter at the White House rank among those experiences?
Well, that was just a special, wonderful time. Anytime you get called something like that, and the deal was with them, we played that first thing, which was a celebration of country music that was done in the Ford Theater. And I mean, they had every country music act in the world there: Johnny Cash and June Carter and Dolly Parton and Ronnie Millsaps and Ray Stevens, all these other, the Oak Ridge Boys, all these other things. The second time that we went back, we played for a barbecue on the lawn, and it was just an interesting thing to be in that situation, to be out there with. When we did the association with country music, or the country music entertainers things, they had all kinds of activities going on around it. And I remember, they would have these elaborate parties at some of the politicians' houses and some of those things. It was quite an eye opener for me. I had never been around politicians of that nature.
Yeah, it must have been a really amazing experience. Excuse me. So I'm going to move on to something later in the 90s. What inspired you to form the International Bluegrass Band?
There was a situation that occurred at the IBMA. The U.S. Navy, Bill Emerson had started a band called Country Current as a recruiting band for the U.S. Navy when he left the Country Gentleman. And it had passed on through other hands and everything. But I was in Nashville actually playing a round of golf with Dan Hayes, who was the head of the IBMA at that point. And when the Army band had come in the previous year to do their part of the program for the IBMA, it was, like the typical show that they played when they were out on their recruiting drives. And the guys, and we were all involved in the Middle East turmoil back then and everything else. And Dan and some of the other folks told those U.S. Navy guys to lay off of the rah rah USA stuff a little bit and do a more traditional bluegrass program, because 85% of the audience that night was going to be from outside the United States. Well, they had agreed to do it, but when they came on to do their show, they went back to the rah rah USA thing that they were doing. And Dan told me it caused a lot of issues there with the IBMA. I think David Crow wound up leaving part of that. I think he's Taylor Swift, one of Taylor Swift's attorneys now. But anyhow, there were problems caused by that. So I asked Dan, I said, well, you've got that thing that happened there. What would it be like? I said, when I travel around the world, I can't really afford to carry a band with me. So they assemble bands. They just get local people to learn off of my records and everything and play with me. And I said, I can cherry pick musicians from all over the world. I said, what would it be like if I brought a band down there that every member of that band was from a different nation, and the bottom line of the music to be an international statement, a musical statement of international goodwill and cooperation. And that's how that band came about. I wound up, one young fella come and played with us a little bit from Australia, one of the Davis brothers over there. Kazuhiro Inaba from Japan was my front man and guitar playing lead singer. And I think we may have played a harmony banjo tune or two. And Kaz is just a wonderful musician. Had Arnold Lesueur from Brussels or Amsterdam, one from over there. He was from the European continent. And then had Sean McCurr from Northern Ireland there. He was actually a mandolin player, but he played bass in the group that I had put together. So I got all those guys together, and we wound up with Jan Johansson playing with us some as well. He was Swedish. He had come over here as an interpreter, I think, years before. But I had all these people from different nations, and it was just, like I said, a musical statement of international cooperation and goodwill.
Was that basically a one-off experience just for the International Bluegrass Music that year?
Yeah, it was pretty much one experience. I lost a bunch of money on that trip.
Oh, no.
No.